So both of the congressional districts in New Hampshire are technically toss-ups, but I wanted to focus on New Hampshire 1 because, it really is hard to believe, but Zoomers are old enough to run for Congress now.
Yes.
Like that's just terrifying to think of. Like when I started paying attention to politics, Zoomers were in diapers. This is terrible. It's just horrible to think of. But yeah,
quite a few Zoomers hadn't even been born yet, if we're being honest.
No, I mean, not for my political attention, but I mean, I started paying attention probably in '99, so the oldest Zoomers were 2 at the time. But technically you could have paid attention that far back. But yeah, so they're 25 years old now. Like, yes, and the New Hampshire 1st primary actually has 2 Zoomers. One of them is polling pretty low in the single digits. He's not going to make it very far. But another one is actually doing pretty well for herself. She is no outsider. She has been in D.C. for, I would say, most, if not all, of her professional life. She worked under Kellyanne Conway. She was a spokeswoman for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. Now, of course, being a former spokeswoman is going to be extremely polished. Everything she says is going to be cookie cutter, pre-planned, written down, memorized 5 times over. However, think about what's wrong with it.
Karoline, tell me, as you've gone around the district for the last year, give me the 1 or 2 biggest concerns top of mind with people that you're reaching out to vote for you, people that will be your constituents, both the MAGA crowd and independents and also Democrats. What for folks in the Grand Estate, what's at top of mind for them?
Well, first and foremost, certainly the unmitigated spending down in D.C. The Democrats just passed their laughable Inflation Reduction Act, which we could talk all day about the fact that it's not going to reduce inflation at all. People are very, very nervous, and they're hurting because of the unmitigated, uncontrolled spending. We have a massive labor crisis here in our state of New Hampshire. Every business owner that I talk to, I'm the candidate most supported by our business community here, they cannot find enough help. We have restaurant owners offering $30, $35 an hour for a dishwashing position, and young high school students are not taking those jobs in our state. That's, I believe, a cultural problem, too. We lack all sense of personal responsibility and work ethic amongst my generation, Generation Z, and that's an issue I seek to champion when I'm elected. But secondly, the border crisis is causing an unprecedented surge in illegal fentanyl coming to our state. We've been hit really hard by the opioid epidemic here. I have a lot of former colleagues and teammates and friends who are no longer with us because, frankly, they stuck a needle in their arm with drugs that came up from Mexico. So our law enforcement is really struggling to deal with that, and a lot of people are losing their lives. So it's my goal to be an issue or a champion on the issue of border security and speak truth to this. We might not see it in every state with the human impact of the illegal immigration, but we're feeling it with the drug crisis here in our state as well.
So that, of course, is Karoline Leavitt. With those of you who didn't recognize the voice, that is Steve Bannon on his podcast War Room. I had to make a comment real quick first before Jacob, the point I know you want to make. She starts off saying, the Democrats just passed their Inflation Reduction Act, which we could talk all day about. That's a problem right there, because she's suggesting, I could spend hours and hours talking about this very, very finely detailed economic policy wonk bill. I'm sorry. Snooze. There's a bunch of Z's coming from my head at the very thought of that. No one wants to hear about that. No one wants to hear nitpicking about, actually, the marginal tax rate will go up by 0.75% or whatever because of this bill. No one wants to hear about that. They want to hear about the issues that actually really affect them. They want to hear about immigration. They want to hear about culture war issues, critical race theory, transgenderism, the stuff that won the Virginia election last year, that led that red wave in Virginia and New Jersey across the country last year. No one wants to hear this economic policy talk, but she's suggesting already right there she would rather be talking about that.
Yeah, and it shows that with that, the talking points that she's bringing are the talking points that the donor base of the Republican Party, not the voting base, wants to hear. Because immediately after that, she goes straight into what the folks in big business want to hear, and that is the shortage of labor. She mentions that some restaurant owners are having to offer $33 an hour for dishwashers. I'm sorry, I don't buy that.
That's kind of insane.
Not in New Hampshire. Maybe somewhere in New York City, possibly.
California,
some restaurant
maybe?
Maybe an upscale restaurant is offering $33 for a dishwasher starting out. But even if they are, isn't that a good thing? Like, aren't we trying to help uplift working people? Aren't working class Americans the ones who have been getting screwed over by this country over the past 30 years? I mean, isn't that a good thing that salaries and wages are rising that high? But notice her solution to fixing this doesn't make any sense. she's talking about how there's a labor shortage. Like that's one of the things that she's hearing most about. Well, I know who's telling her that. It's a lot of restaurant owners who don't like the fact that they now have to actually pay their dishwashers a living wage. So her solution to fix this is just to talk about how Generation Z is lazy. Is she saying that she's better than the other members of her generation because I guess she does want to work?
Yeah,
good luck getting Gen Z to vote for you if that's the way you're going to insult them.
Yeah, you can tell these talking points. She did not come up with this. These were
absolutely not.
These were fed to her by older boomer donors who look down on those lazy kids who need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, and they're using her as their talking points machine to talk like they would talk. This is basically what some friends of mine refer to as a trans boomer, someone who is she's got the body of a Zoomer, but she's got the mindset of a boomer. She's basically like a 50-year-old policy wonk, lobbyist in the body of a 23-year-old girl who was a former Trump administration staffer. And it really is sad. Like, oh, see, I don't like my generation either. Like, okay, believe me, I got lots of problems with my generation, the millennial generation, but I'm not going to turn around and insult them all and say like, oh, I think everybody in my generation is lazy. Like, there's a lot of factors you got to look at here. Like, yes, you can argue that millennials and Zoomers are less productive. Like they're not as, entrepreneurial, certainly as previous generations. But you also got to look at the fact that certainly the workforce and the state of living conditions, or the cost of living rather, in America today are substantially worse than they were, when their parents and their grandparents were younger. That you could talk about, you want to blame boomers. That's a different discussion for another day. But the fact of the matter is there's just so many factors at play here to just say, oh, they're just lazy kids, lazy high schoolers, don't want to take these jobs. That's so watering it down to a very, very one-dimensional outlook that doesn't even come close. Like you said, it offers no solutions to the problem she's talking about.
And if she wouldn't, she's running for Congress to fix this problem. And I guess just to talk about it, and as if Zoomers are going to hear this congresswoman who's their age talking about how they need to go to work and wash dishes for $15 an hour instead of $30 an hour, so that's going to make them want to do it. But if we read between the lines, obviously that's not all she's going to do. She's being sent to Washington, D.C. by big business to what's the very next thing she talks about? Immigration.
Yeah.
And what does she complain about immigration? Does she complain about all of the poor immigrants coming over here taking the dishwashing jobs? No, she talks about fentanyl. Hey, the Democrats are all for stopping fentanyl. The big business Republicans are all for stopping fentanyl. What they're not for is stopping the flow of people. And
the drugs don't get across the border by themselves. The boxes of drugs don't grow legs and walk. They're brought over by the people.
Yes, exactly. So the fentanyl coming from China actually produces more fentanyl than Mexico, but the fentanyl coming from China comes through the mail. The fentanyl coming from Mexico comes being carried on the back of a person walking across the border or swimming across the Rio Grande. And this is the problem that the Republican Party has. Like, they're not addressing the immigration issue head on because big business needs the labor. Big business and even small businesses don't want to pay their dishwashers a living wage, because the reality is a lot of American businesses were built in an economy where labor was cheap. And to keep that labor cheap, big business and middling businesses, they sent people like this lady to Washington, D.C. to fight for conservative values when they really just wanted this person to vote for more legal immigration, because the more legal immigration they get, the lower they can pay their employees. And this is the thing that voters have to read between the lines to catch whenever they're sorting through candidates. Because the brain trust behind these cookie cutter Republican candidates, for every one person who's a MAGA guy in a campaign, in a mainstream campaign, you've got 10 Frank Luntzes who are poring over the polling data with Republican voters, seeing what Republican voters want to hear. And they'll send red meat voters' way. But then the people that the voters elect, they go do whatever the Chamber of Commerce wants. Now, I do want to offer this disclaimer. This is not a personal attack on Karoline Leavitt. This is an attack on the brain trust of the Republican Party that continues to produce candidates like this and coach candidates like this to serve the Chamber of Commerce. Because we see how they reacted to Donald Trump. The same people are running the GOP, and they want to return to the Bush years. Now, lest you think that I'm saying don't vote for Leavitt, vote for her opponent. Her opponent isn't really that much better. So her opponent is a former State Department advisor in the Trump administration. If you look at his foreign policy page, not only is his website just chock full of typos, but if his foreign policy page is very clearly hinting that he believes that the United States should return to the foreign policy of Mitt Romney. all through this thing. It's deploring the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's deploring the gutting of the U.S. military, as if Biden hasn't spent more on the military than Donald Trump did. It's deploring the loss of America's place in the world. This is not what Donald Trump ran on foreign policy-wise. Trump ran on an American-first foreign policy, not a globalist-first foreign policy, not the post-World War II international order that the Democrats believe in. And then if you look at the election integrity, by the way, this guy's name is Matt Mowers.
Yes.
Matt Mowers is Karoline Leavitt's opponent.
I had to say, by the way, in reviewing the basics of this race ahead of recording this episode, I took a look at the list of endorsements for the variety of Republican candidates running this seat. There's 10 candidates, by the way, 10 Republicans in this primary. You take one look at the top 2 endorsements for Matt Mowers' campaign: Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo. And I'm sorry, that tells you all you need to know right there, especially your point that like he very much sounds like a neocon, hardcore interventionist foreign policy. Those endorsements right there really just take the cake. Like that, you should be definitely judge some of these candidates by who they're endorsed by. And I think that is all. Anybody affiliated with Nikki Haley, I am immediately and automatically skeptical of.
Yeah, this just shows the sorry choice that a lot of Republican voters have to make in a lot of these congressional districts.
Yeah, polling in that race seems to suggest that Mowers is the front runner, although the latest poll has him tied with Karoline Leavitt. And most of the polls do make sure to note that the largest plurality of voters in that district are still undecided at this point. It's a wide open primary. There's no clear front runner. So this certainly would be a race. It's a month away now. This certainly would be a race that Trump's endorsement would shake up for sure. If he came out and endorsed Karoline Leavitt, she would be the front runner. If he endorsed Mowers, he would probably win. Other people who are running, Gail Huff, the wife of Scott Brown, the former senator from Massachusetts, she's running in that district. So if Trump came out and endorsed her, she'd probably end up winning, plus the name recognition. So that's very much an up for grabs seat against an incumbent Democrat, Chris Pappas. So we'll be following that one closely and seeing if, I mean, obviously if it flips red, that would be great. But if the person who flips it red is ultimately just another shell for the establishment, the neocon, Chamber of Commerce class, then is that really a victory? That's up to you guys to decide. One more point I had to make, though, what I'm seeing here, as you said, the talking points they are feeding this young woman who, if she were elected, she would be the new youngest member of Congress. She would be kind of like Madison Cawthorn. She would be 25 years old upon being elected. And like Madison Cawthorn, I feel this is their attempt. This is the party establishment's, the donor class's attempt to control the next Madison Cawthorn. Because you remember when Madison Cawthorn was elected, it was a huge upset. He ran against a woman named Linda Bennett in that seat for North Carolina's 11th district because Mark Meadows, the previous member from that seat, he resigned to become Trump's chief of staff in the final years. And Mark Meadows himself, President Trump, so many other people endorsed this woman, Linda Bennett, who went to a runoff primary with Cawthorn, which she then lost by a pretty large margin to this guy who came out of nowhere, this 25-year-old kid in a wheelchair. And it was very much an upset. I think you and I talked about this before when we recapped his primary loss. He very much was seen as stepping on the toes, or I guess in his case, wheeling over the toes I'm sorry. He very much got in the way of the North Carolina party establishment, and they never forgave him for that. They didn't like that. So they were always plotting his downfall because certainly once he got into office, they couldn't control him. He aligned himself more with not even the Freedom Caucus, more like that fire-breathing brand of the GOP in the House. He aligned himself with Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar. He was very much part of that Turning Point USA speaking circuit. He was close to Charlie Kirk, who, of course, is undyingly loyal to Trump, and they couldn't stand that. Again, the youngest member of Congress was not really someone they could control. So they went out of their way to ultimately tear him down. McCarthy exiled him, basically, and then they got him primaried out by some totally bland, vanilla state senator. And this is their attempt to say, okay, if we're going to have another Madison Cawthorn, another super young member of Congress, we want to control her. We want to control every single talking point so that she is completely indistinguishable from a Kevin McCarthy or a Paul Ryan. And
they want.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say they want to create a Republican AOC that is controlled by the GOP establishment.
Yes. Exactly. Because AOC, too, is another example, like Madison Cawthorn. She's not exactly controlled by their establishment. She's gone quieter these days, certainly now that Trump's not in office anymore. But you could tell she and the rest of the squad have come to a sort of mutual understanding with Nancy Pelosi. They're not at each other's throats in public anymore over issues like Israel or whatnot. They go along to get along at this point. AOC took a little while to learn that. but ultimately she has learned that probably to her political benefit. Now, again, someone like a Madison Cawthorn may have ultimately gotten there with, Kevin McCarthy and the Republican leadership given time, but the Republicans are not ready to take that risk. They don't want that to even be a possibility.